basically how to visualize what is basic for life, which is air, water, and also time, and how to make images in that has no image, which I think, as Nia pointed out, I think that's what art does. Art, I think, tries to make something that does not quite exist yet existent. So this is a project that is, as I say, basically has moved into being more about time and more about air. And I work normally only with drawing and video are my media. So what I try to do also is try to find the basic elements for representation. So what is essential to represent that thing that I'm thinking about. And my thinking is also quite scattered. I don't think, it's also non-linear. So when I think about time, I don't think about time in a metrical way. So things happening one thing after the other, but I think of time as being more atmospherical, more like the weather. In Spanish, we use the same word, time, for time and weather. And I've been very interested in this idea because I think time as it exists is chaotic, like the weather. It's predictable and unpredictable. But we are used to thinking about time in a very linear way, like one thing happening after the other. Well, now we know this is not true. We know that time is actually something that is topological. It exists in space, and it depends on the space it occupies. It exists in one way or another. So I'm very interested in this gap between how things seem to be and how things really are. And that gap, I think, is precisely what allows for new things to happen. And that's exactly where art, has to position itself, where art exists, in that gap in between what we think things are and what things really are. My work is also process-based, so that's why what you're going to be seeing and what I'm going to be talking about is something that started, as I say, 2014, and is still ongoing, because I'm more interested in the process than in the result of things and the objects. The objects don't interest me too much. I mean, they do for 15 seconds, but then I'm moving to something else. So all that said, this project started in New York in 2014, 2015. I was invited to do a site-specific project for a space in Williamsburg. Williamsburg is a neighborhood, I don't know if you guys know this, it's a neighborhood that is super trendy. It's in Brooklyn, and it's one of the neighborhoods that is suffering gentrification the most. So, El Museo de los Sures is a space that is Puerto Rican, and it's a space that is there sort of to fight against gentrification and to keep the memory of the neighborhood alive, the original neighborhood. So they invited me to do a project about the specifics of the space, but I was living in New York at the time, but I wasn't living there. I was not Puerto Rican, so I didn't feel I could speak about what they were experiencing. So I thought, let's think about what are the conditions for life to happen. So I started thinking about that and reading about that, and there's basically three things that are needed for life to happen. One is water. It's mostly water, mostly a membrane, and then air, which is not super necessary. So anyway, what I started to do is started to put images on the water and the air that was around the space. And what I did, which is what I always do when I'm trying to start something, is I started doing some drawings using only dots, lines, and later on colors. Dots because they are the minimal element of representation. It's according to Euclid, a point is something that has no dimension. A line, so I was using dots in different ways. This was more like thinking about the membrane. And then a line is the flow of a dot. So when a dot moves, it creates a line. So Euclid basically put the basis of geometry, which means geometry means the measurement of the Earth. So he was trying to measure the Earth and try to come up with elements to be able to measure the Earth. So I used only, as I said, those lines and later on colors. So these are some drawings I started doing on paper. Then at a certain point, as I also do normally, I started filming what was happening around me. So I started filming the snow falling. So what I was doing here, I just put the camera and let it film. And afterwards, so video for me, it's a tool that I use to make to allow me to see things better. So anyway, I did a whole series of videos where I capture this, like the snow basically. And for me, it seemed like the air was being materialized through those lines. So for me, it became a metaphor. It was like, like the air was being made visible through those lines. So from then on, from the moment I started with this, which I won't show all of it because I think we have to continue. But so from this moment, I started using only lines in my drawings. First, they were only white lines, and as you see here, colors are starting to appear. And colors first appear in my drawings through the paper or the basis I use. So I use this form of mark making. Because drawing is primarily a form of mark making. We make marks on a surface, right? So I use this form of mark making in most of my drawings, both on paper and also on the wall. I work a lot on site-specific pieces that are basically drawn on the wall, or spaces where things would disappear after. So I use this for a long period of time. This is also on the wall. At a certain point, the lines got more complicated. If you look at basically old etchings, but also more modern ones, there's no way in etching to make surfaces darker unless you use hatching, so you cross lines. So I was trying to reference this form of representation that is quite primitive, in also a very primitive, sort of primitive way. This is also on a wall. This is a project I did for a church in New York, downtown New York, and what I decided to do was to draw the oldest mountain range on Earth. Because as I said before, part of my investigation, part of my thinking has to do with time and how we think to exist in one form of time, but there's many layers of time in our life. So geological time, for example, is another form of it's almost like another entity. It's something we cannot really comprehend because we are used to very limited amount of time. In fact, there's a friend here who tries to explain to me things, and when he says, "Oh, this is 100,000 years old," I don't understand. I lose track. I don't know what he means. I know it's a lot, but I don't know what he means. So anyway, I engage a lot with landscape and geological time. This is the last project I did using this way of making marks. Uh, this is a view of my studio when I was preparing what I will show you in a second. It was basically, again, it's called atmospheric meditation. It's a project where I use sheetrock to do very high-scale drawings. And part of the project is also this book that I'm going to pass around, so if you guys want to check out. This is the views in the gallery where it was shown. So there were 5 drawings, 5 colors, and 5 elements that I thought were important to represent. And we'll get to that later if you want, or if you have questions, because I still have quite a bit to go. Anyway, the next phase of this project happened in Rome. I got a fellowship at the Spanish Academy in Rome in 2017 to do a project there. And so when I arrived in Rome, I was more thinking about how to think about air and the relationship between air and time, and the relationship between air, time, and light. So in Rome, there were 2 things that were basically what interested me. One was the Pantheon in Rome, but not because of the Pantheon itself, but because of how light is rendered visible when, how air is rendered visible when the light enters the oculus. Also, I was interested in the Pantheon because it's supposedly a sundial. So it was made to know what time it was and what day of the year it was. So I was interested in the Pantheon, and I was also interested in the meridian of Santa Maria degli Angeli. A meridian is a line that is aligned with a meridian of the Earth, and has a device that either casts a shadow or allows light to hit it at a certain in a certain point. And it was commissioned by the Pope Albani to know exactly where the Easter would fall. So basically, the whole city of Rome is organized around the meridian, which marks the noon for many centuries, until another pope decided it was time to change. And now there is a very loud bang. I don't know if you've been in Rome, but from the Gianicolo, there's always a cannonball that is shot. It's not shot, it's just a sound, but you can hear it at noon every day, and all the churches are aligned with that shot. And that's basically just to normalize the city and to be sure that they were being holy and that they were counting Easter when it was. So anyway, I thought Rome was basically organized through light and through the measurement of time. The other thing that I was very interested in Rome in particular was the way the light went through the trees. Also, something very special for me, at least, about Rome is the pine trees. They are, I don't know, pretty amazing. So anyway, those 3 elements were guiding my project. So so here is an example, the way of thinking about how to put an image on this light, which was an excuse to put an image on air, which was an excuse to put an image on time, at least for me and my thinking. So what I did was I thought about how light travels and how light, basically how light functions. So light travels in a radial way and in straight lines. And then I decided that it was the interruptions in those lines that would make the image visible, which is basically what happens. I mean, we see things because light hits it. If there's no light, we don't see them. Also, my experience in Rome was very interrupted. I felt I was being interrupted all the time. So I work with that in my images. I'm going to show you the final project with our 3 very big scale installations. These are the scale models I did to try to understand how they would work. I'll show you later how they came out. So this one I was engaging with the Pantheon. And this one I was engaging more with the trees. And this one I was referencing how do you call it, as a calendar that exists that can predict, that you can know what day would be, I don't know, 15th of October 2014. It's a very big drawing that exists in Santa Maria de oh my god, I'm blanking on the name, I'll remember later, but it exists. There is this sort of calendar exists in Rome, and it was created in the 1600s by some monks, and you can still use it to understand, to know when you know, to predict, to know what the calendar for the next number of years. Another thing that I did, and you might have seen in the first drawing, I started to engage with diagrams that express how the calculations to make sun clocks, sundials are done. It's based on how the sun hits the earth. Sorry. So I used geometrical diagrams in my installations to include that mathematical side. Then the third thing that happened is in 2017 I also got this grant to go to the Banff Center for the Arts and Creativity in Canada. And when I arrived, this is what I saw from my studio. And when I saw this, I couldn't understand what this thing was. Banff is a valley that was created by a glacier, and it's the result of an absence. It's the result of something that is no longer there. The thing that I thought was amazing is that, for the most part, the air and the earth would merge. Like, it's so high up, or the clouds are so low, I don't know, that earth and the air seem to merge. So I couldn't understand it, and I couldn't also understand how the trees would go all the way to the top. This is really high up. And in Spain and mostly in Europe, there is like a lime tree. You can see in most mountains, right, when the trees stop, and then there's a different type of I don't know, geology. There's more people that are more qualified here to explain this. But anyway, I was very shocked by this. So as I normally do, again, when I don't know what I'm faced with, I'm going to pause that. What I started doing is I started filming. I would just put my camera and start filming. And this is one of the videos I did. This is only a clip. Oh, again, sorry. So I just, as I said, I just put my camera and let it record. And what I was very interested in was the subtle changes in the landscape that were happening precisely due to atmospheric conditions, due to how the clouds and the sun were passing. The other thing that I was very amazed to see in these videos, well, two things. One was the basic absence of color. So when you would see this landscape, it seemed that there was no color. Eventually, the snow started melting and colors started to appear. But when I left, it was pretty snowing still, so I didn't see the whole thing as it is. But I was struck by this. The other thing I was struck by, as I said, were the little trees, which to me seem the ones that made basically the mountain visible, right? Because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to see it, because it was merging with the sky. So then the other thing I did, apart from filming, was of course making drawings. So I made one drawing a day of the 4 mountains that surrounded me, of the 4 mountains that created the valley. The choice of color, it depends on how the atmospheric conditions were that day and the amount of visibility. So I would always check the weather forecast to see what visibility there was. So these are small ones. And then the other thing is I created these little objects that were the fir trees that I was seeing. Because for me it was like, these are the little guys that are the basic element of my image. So I made these little things, which for me were also like rulers. And you see, I always like to have some objects or some things that are physical. And then I move into the space. And in my drawings, I don't know if you can see from there, but the mark making basically was this sort of like little triangles. And then we are back in Rome, number 2 yet again. So these are the last pieces that I did, the latest ones. These are basically the big installations of the little scale models you've seen. Something that happened in Banff that was very important for me was that I felt the need to overcome the limitations of the frame, basically, because as it was a landscape that was totally unlimited, I felt like I couldn't limit myself to just to the little squares or whatever. So I expanded, and this series is basically a breakthrough in that sense for me. This is, 5 meters, yes, 5 meters long, and this is done on site too. And I can get to that later if there's any question. So it's basically done with a ruler. And this is the last piece that was done, was reviewed at Matadero, Madrid this last spring, where we had our show for the Academy in Rome. This piece was shown together with the video that I'm a little bit reluctant to show because you can see it online, it's on Vimeo. I don't want to show it because it's the quality of the screen and the compression of the video is really quite awful, so I'd rather keep it. But it's animation where I merged both the Pantheon and the trees and the light that exists there. So anyway, I guess with this presentation or with this process, what I was trying to think about is how art can be thought as some motes that connect with other things in broad spatio-temporal dimensions. Like art, I think, works in the unpredictable. So you never know what's going to come out, which I think is also where the potential and the interest of art is, that it's that brings out that which does not yet exist. So that's basically what I was trying to do with this what I'm trying to do with this. I'm now still working on, I'm still obsessed about the absence of colors in the landscape in Banff, so I'm working with how colors appear in the landscape. So I think I'll stop there.
Okay. So what we want to do is actually let you practice visualization. Okay? And I guess some of you have pens, we have some papers, and Laura will explain you the instruction, what you're supposed to do. I will recommend you to choose someone you don't know, and then it will be interesting to understand actually how we can actually start to process or think about visualization, but not what we see with our eyes, but what we feel with our body. So you will give them the instruction.
I'll give you the instruction. So one thing to just to preface this is art, I think, is a translation. Art translates ideas that are in your head into something that is somewhat physical. So it works always in this gap in between what it is and what we think things are. So what we thought we would do today is each of you just take a page and you need a pencil or a pen and choose, as Nir says, someone. I'm not gonna force someone you don't know, but the thing we are gonna do is I want you to draw something on your friend's back, and the person that has the drawing is feeling the drawing has to translate it on the paper. Do you understand? It's gonna be pretty not too long, but you have to probably stand up and use the table.
Use the table, because one needs to write on the back and the other one needs to draw what he feels.
To draw the feeling of the.
You want us to give you a quick demonstration, maybe? Don't be shy. I mean, we're here to engage. So let's try to do this activity. Okay?
I know varios, but I think it's claro para que es más fácil hacerte así.
Antes era
The three of them.
So we have time for Q&A, and one of the things that I want to take the permission and ask the first question, because one of the things that I asked Laura is that if someone over here came to the audience and he has an idea to visualize something, or she has an idea to visualize something, what is kind of if I would call it the reverse engineering of her process in order for you to understand maybe what are the first 1 or 2, 3 steps that you can do. So one of the things that I'm interested to understand is that if I have an idea to visualize something, what would you recommend me to do?
Well, if I were you, which I'm not, but so that's the first thing. Like, what would one do? So, but I think the first thing is to understand what the thing you're trying to visualize is, and how that works, and how what makes that thing be what it is, rather than something else. So if I can relate it to my work, for example, if you take the Rome approach, it's like, okay, so what is light and how does light works? So I would do that. I would think about, okay, and try to visualize something. Let's break it into pieces. Let's go to the basics of it. Let's go to what makes this thing be what it is, and take it from there and see if there's something in there that gives you a clue on how to represent it. So I'm always very interested in art. I always think it's much more difficult to take things out in art than to put things, because because the basics of something is much more complicated to get. But that's what tells you what something is. I don't know if I'm being, if I'm answering your question or if I'm being,
Depends on you.
being clear. What?
Because you know what it's interesting because what you said is actually take what you're trying to do and break it to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
But you take time and you actually make it to something else because you refer to time as something chaotic, not something that has order. And that's kind of interesting for me to understand why you brought a different thinking to what time is. And then how you actually approach time if you actually take it out of the common basics and create your own perception of what time is.
Well, I think because it's the gap between what we think something is and what the thing really is, where you can actually where there's this room to play with things. So I took time, and it's interesting because if you see my work, I'm talking about something that is chaotic, but actually my work is not chaotic at all. It's pretty organized, but that's my own limitation. I mean, that's my need to try to put order in something I don't understand. So I think we are always trapped also in our own schemes of things. And that's also very interesting to understand because there's a limitation to what we can do. And the thing with art is that art is always something more than we can predict. I know I'm not answering your question either, but I just don't know how to answer it because I don't think there's a straightforward way to do things. And I think in a creative process, I don't know if you guys are artists or creative people. I mean, everybody's creative, right? So I don't believe no one. So you don't know. You start with something, and you have to basically engage with the thing in your own process and in the own process of the thing and in the environment, and sort of basically live with this thing, and something new happens. Like I'm never interested in a project that I know the outcome, because then why bother to do it? Right? I'm more interested in seeing like, oh, I have this starting point and let's see where this takes me. So it's a very open-ended in that way. But I do need to give myself some rules. It's like what we just did today. We have 3 rules. You know, paint on your friend's back and then translate that. You have a little membrane, you have a little boundary, right, that gives you a limit, and then whatever might happen inside of that is unpredictable, and which is basically life, right? Does that help? Or
So, I mean, for me, no, I mean, you know, with the conversation that we had, because me and Laura, we had a lot of conversation, and we can talk about it for hours. But, for example, a few things that I took from her work is that, first of all, it surprised me that she looked at time as something chaotic, as something like the weather, that you cannot predict it. So one thing that actually, you know, that I thought about how you can actually think about even what we see as the opposite of what we think it is, and then try to work from there. And that's one way for me, for example, that I took from Laura's work, how I can try to do things. Instead of thinking what I see, is actually to think about the opposite and then start to work from there. And another process that I like is when you spoke about the valley that created, that you try to understand what is, but what is not there, and then work from there instead of focusing on what we have, instead of what we don't have, or what we have. You know, there is the theory when you draw, is that instead of drawing the object, you draw the between the objects, the spaces between the objects until you get to the object itself. So that's kind of another process that I found interesting, and that can give me maybe an idea when I get to visualize something, how I need to think about it. But I don't want.
May I just, because I didn't explain this, but this is basically the ballet. The inverted ballet. This is how what I wanted to see was the glacier that wasn't there. So we made actually a 3D model of how it would be if that valley will fill. So these are basically the mountains, but they are like a void now, and the positive is the glacier. So exactly, I mean, I was trying to work with the opposite, and also working with an idea that I didn't mention this, but I use a lot of maps and thinking about how maps are made in my work. And I was looking into maps of glaciers, and there is this thing that is called the boundary of visible ice to determine where a glacier ends, basically. And I make my project about basically the boundary of the invisible ice, the ice that was not there anymore. So I precisely am interested in what things are not, if that makes sense.
Okay, questions? Don't be shy. You always need the first one to be the kind of...
Thank you for your talk, and also the exercise was very interesting. So my question is, for example, you said, we tend to be taught into our way of thinking. Everybody has some pattern. So in your case, how do you get out of that pattern, or how do you overcome your own pattern?
I don't know that I achieved that. I don't think. I mean, I think. I guess I just said I mentioned before that I work with chaos, but I'm very controlled in my work. In a way, I mean, there's many things that fall out of my control because because of the nature of the project. It's, as I said, it's done on site, so many things happen. But what I do try to do is be open to the process, so to learn from the process.